This is Gemara Zevachim Daf Ayin Aleph, as we begin a new parak, the 8th parak here in Mesechet Zevachim. And as we'll see, in as much as, of course, this is dealing with karbanos, but as we're going to see, this will have a large ripple effect, we could call it, in many other areas of halachos. So hopefully it'll be a little bit more familiar to all of us. And of course, they call the learning to be an incredible schos for Shlema for Gabriel Simcha ben Miriam Ahuva b'soich sha'ar chayla Yisrael. Says the Mishnah, Kol zevachim shenisarvu b'chatois hamesos. Any carbon that was mixed together with a chatos that was mesos. Now, what's a chatos that was mesos? This is a chatos that was left to die. The reason being it was a chatos carbon, but for some reason it cannot be brought as a carbon for many different reasons, as we've learned at different intervals, whether it's a female, whether it is a tamura. I guess that's the case that we've seen many times, that when you switch it, it retains the sanctity, but it can't be brought as a carbon, and therefore it just has to be left to graze and die. The owner dies is case 3. Case 4, says Rashi, if the bailim brought a different carbon for kapara, and case 5 is if the animal is now more than a year old. In any of those cases, the animal has to be left to die. So if a regular carbon gets mixed with that carbon, or a regular carbon gets mixed with shar niskol, afilu achas beribui, even if one is mixed with 10,000 of them, a tremendous quantity, what's the halacha? Yamusu kulan. So imagine you have one kosher carbon, you have one puzzle carbon, and you have 10,000 kosher carbonis. That's, again, I'm jumping the gun. The Gemara is going to discuss which way it is. The lashon of the Mishnah sounds the opposite, which is really what just caught myself up. But the lashon of the Mishnah sounds like that if a kosher carbon gets mixed with 10,000 usher carbonis, then they all have to be left to die. But what's the chiddush in that? So the Gemara is going to discuss that. Continues the Mishnah, Nisarvu b'shar shenavdu by aveira, if it gets mixed with a carbon of a shar that an aveira was done with that shar. We'll see exactly what that means. But this is not a case where the animal is left to die, but rather the case where the animal is usher. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, or shehemis es adam. Shehemis es adam. Or, one second, where did our page go? Here we go. Or it got mixed together with an ox that was hemis bayis adam. It killed a person, according to Alpi 8 Echad, according to the testimony. Where did our highlighter go? According to the testimony of one person. That's the next case. Alpi Abailim, or according to the testimony of an owner. And again, the reason why, if you look at the top lines in Rashi, Shemis Adam Pi Echad Alpi Abailim, is why the shar shehemis Alpi Abailim, you're not going to actually have to kill the shar. Why? Because Moediv is potter. Similar to the next two cases of Revev and Irva, an animal that was involved in an act of sodomy, bestiality, Al pi echad, al pi bailim nachmal, says Rashi, dashel av shar niskolhu, doesn't have the din of a shar niskol, and therefore, musu shari mutarim lahedyet im leibim neis zevach mutarim bahen. So the problem is that it got mixed together with a carbon. Vi efshar limchar as kulam litzarchei min oisei zevach lakrivam shari psulam lakrava. But the problem is it's pasal lakrava. So this animal is not chayiv skila, but the animal can be brought as a carbon, as Rashi quotes from Tamura. Min abehima loitzi arevev anirva min abakar loitzi is an evan min atzoyin loitzi is a muksa min atzoyin loitzi is a noigeach muksa shasiu l'sarech avodah chavim v'lo yikrivu v'neva v'nasa avodah chavish tachav aloi v'neber kol eisur demura demutarin lehedyet. So the chiddush over here is that we have all these cases that it's indeed mutter lehedyet. However, it's possible for a carbon, and now we have a problem because it's mixed together with a carbon, and the shaila is, what do we do now? So says the Mishnah, or b'muksa. The next case was, as we already saw in Rashi, it's designated for avodah zara, v'nevad, or an animal that actually was worshipped as avodah zara, be'esnan, an animal that was used to pay a zayna, umechir, or is there a dog's exchange? Esnan mechir kelev, a dog used for to be paid for as a zayna, beklayim. As we move over, tayin aleph amid beis, or your carbon got mixed together with kalayim, a hybrid, a illegal combination of animals. And again, let's remind ourselves that the nekuda here is that all these things that got mixed with are pasul for karbanos, ubitreifa, b'yotzei daifin, an animal born by C-section. What's the halacha? Yeru ad sheyistavu. All the animals have to be left to graze until they get a mum. As Rashi on the last wide line points out, the Zevachim behem nesru kulam. Because of the carbon that's mixed together, they all become aser lehed. Says Rashi, so why can't you just change the sanctity from this animal onto another animal? You're not allowed to. So what do? As the Gritzel gets a mum, and then utilize the money to buy a carbon, carbon. And Rashi continues and explains to us, so after that, as a mom, then you could be mechalel, then you could consecrate, then you could change the kedusha onto money, etc. And then what do? Back into the Gemara, the Yamachru, after it has a mom, you sell the animal, which is a form of being paid to the animal, and then the money is going to have the kedusha, and then the money will have the kedusha be brought, an animal will be bought with it. And then with that money, you buy the carbon in its place. Category 2 in the Mishnah. Category 3 in the Mishnah, and it's arvu bechulin timimim. Let's say your carbon gets mixed together with chulin. Nothing's really wrong, it's just not a carbon. Tamim, that does not have a blemish. Then yimachru achulin letzarchei oisa amin. The chulin is sold for those in need of that carbon. For those in need of that carbon, meaning the chulin is mixed together with a carbon. So now we don't know what it is, but it can't be used as chulin and it can't be used as the carbon. So what it's done is it's sold to someone who needs an oila, who needs a shlamim, and then he can bring it as such. Says the Mishnah Vayter, kachim bekachim. If a carbon got mixed with another carbon, two carbon oilas mixed together, min b'minai, of the same type, zeyikrav l'shem mishuv, zeyikrav l'shem mishuv. Each one could be brought for the sake of whoever is the owner. That, again, we don't have to say that it's possible because each one is the same carbon. But let's say it gets mixed in a different min, then and then you take the money and you buy with each one, and then there's going to be a loss in this case, unfortunately, and meaning there's going to be a loss because you're going to have to buy the higher value, which they're not both the same value. So therefore, money is going to have to be added in order to buy the carbon. It's arvu b'bechar b'maiser yeru achisavu nachamol v'yachlu kebechar uchemaiser, and you eat it with both chumras. It concludes the Mishnah any carbon can mix with another carbon aside for a chatas and an asham. Before we dive into the Gemara, let's take one more moment for Rashi to spell out a little bit more. By Kachim Bekachim, Rashi tells us that what's the problem? The problem is they have different bailim, and therefore each one has to be brought l'shem mishahu, because we don't know which is the owner. But if it's a oila bishlamim and min be'enai minai, then the process of these carbonates are not exactly the same, and that's where you run into a problem. Says the Gemara, my afilu. We pointed this out when we read the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, if even one kosher carbon is mixed with 10,000 apostle carbonates, they all have to be left to die. What's the afilu? Of course, says the Gemara, Zevachim, arvu bahen, any carbon that's mixed with any of Shabazar ben Chatos HaMeisais, with which any of the Chatos that must be left to die becomes mixed. Aishar aniskal. Then afilu echa beribu yamusu. Even if one is the one that has to die, 10,000 karbanos yamusu kulan. Meaning the way that we explain the Mishnah, just the reading of the Mishnah Shver, and the Gemara points it out, and the Gemara clarifies that indeed the chiddush of the Mishnah is that if you have one puzzle carbon, one puzzle animal, ashar aniskal, etc., and many kosher korbanos gets mixed together, all of them would have to be left to die. Says the Gemara, Tanina Chadazim. We learned one time, Kol Asur and the Gabi Mizbeach. Anything that is Asur for the Mizbeach, Asurin Bechol Shehein, is Asur in any amount. So anything which cannot be brought into the Mizbeach, like any of the cases in our Mishnah, even a kol shehu, and this really is mamish the previous Gemara, that you could have thousands and thousands of kosher animals, and you have one little puzzle animal, and it's going to puzzle them all up. Exampling, says the Mishnah, if an animal is involved in an act of sodomy to a person, or vice versa, then what's the halacha? They're all puzzled. So the question is, why does the Mishnah have to repeat this halacha? So Amar Rav Ashi, says Rav Ashi, if we already had this Mishnah, it's a Mishnah on Temura, Tanina Lachad Zimna. Why did our Mishnah have to say it again? So Amar Rav Ashi explains Rav Ashi, Amrita L'Shmaitai, Kamed Rav Simi, Vatzrichin. And he said, you know why we need it? Timi husband filled near that Mishnah over there in Temura. I would have thought the halacha applies that it's aser ligavoya for the Beis Hamikdash aval hedyet emaloi, but maybe it's mutter for a hedyet. Our Mishnah is all case of Isura Ana aval hani emaloi. But in the Mishnah and Temura, it's not necessarily Isra Ana, and therefore, Tzrichi, we need both Mishnayis. Ask the Zumaras further, Talavi Isuri Ana Ninu, those that are not Asar Ba'ana, Hatani Le, we already learned them. So, meaning, parts of the Mishnah and Temura are on Esther. You're explaining to me, you need it for that extra kinei. I hear. What about the rest of the Mishnah? Says the Gemara, Mikatani bekama kol sheim, hasa kol sheim asam katani. Our Mishnah doesn't say the kol sheim. That's what's added on over there. V'nisni havel abayha. So write it all in one Mishnah. Tekanta tzrichle. Our Mishnah wants to say the takana that what yero as sheistavu. You let them graze until they get a blemish. That is the chiddush of our Mishnah. Continues the Gemara, the hediyin ami tani le. The case that it's asur lahediyit is also learned in a Mishnah Avodah Zarah that says, "Yilu asurim v'asurim b'kol shein yain nezach avodas chavim." So you already know this halacha. Says the Gemara as we turn over to Ayin Beis and Aleph, and you can tell from all the short amudim that these might be short in words, but in concepts they're of course tremendous. Says the Gemara, "Srichi dime hasam hava mina lahediyit aval gavayim alai." And therefore, nafsadinu lekulu, I would say, should not be all aser. The mehacha, let's stop over here, because this is its own, keeps on going. Tomorrow we'll pick it up in this kasha b'siyata dishmaya.